Willkommen! I'm John Denor, and this is Goblin Points. June has been a month of character content and monster design. With the core system in place, ancestries and classes are being worked on. The team has also focused on how monsters should work and how to make them fun and easy to run. Lastly, we've got some new details about the virtual tabletop. Let's dive in. Up until recently, the main focus of the design team has been on the player side of the RPG, making character creation, figuring out how character progression works, and making fighting monsters fun. Now, however, the focus has shifted to the director side of the game. The things being worked on is making monsters fun to run, assisting the director in making interesting encounters, and figuring out if there is a better way to run encounters. In practice, this means we're seeing a lot of content starting to emerge on the player side. Ancestries, classes, character options are being previewed left, right, and center. While on the director side, it's the crunch and experimentation of new designs getting closer and closer to a working solution. Let's look at what they've been working on the director side. First up, encounter design. In last month's Roundup, I mentioned that they were trying out phases. Phases happened on the director's turns and instructed that monsters in certain categories should go in a certain order. This was to assist the director in running tactical combats. The problem was that it was poorly received by testers. It felt limiting and as taking away agency from the director. After some experimentation with other solutions, the design team has come up with a solution that makes it more fun to run monsters, makes it easier to run large amounts of monsters, and makes it easier for the director to run combats tactically. This new design relies on squads of minions and their captains. A minion squad consists of a group of minions that have a shared stamina pool which loses stamina when any of the minions takes damage. When 1 minion's worth of stamina is lost from the pool, 1 minion dies. That means a lot of damage to 1 minion could do enough damage to kill the minion and another minion. But how do you reconcile the other minion not being within range of the attack that killed the first? Through cinematic narrative. James described an attack that lobbed the head of 1 skeleton minion, the hero catching the head mid-air and throwing it at another skeleton, crushing that skeleton too. Minions have simplified stat blocks and are quick to run because when they attack, the director only makes a single roll, which is then used for every attack the minions make. That means a single roll can translate to 5 or 6 or more attacks. This makes it faster to run a lot of monsters without taking away the fun of running a lot of monsters. To prevent a single hero from being overwhelmed and killed by an entire squad in a single turn, each minion in a squad has to attack a different enemy. If a minion doesn't have an enemy of their own to attack, they assist one of their squad mates and boost their attack a little. Having a squad attack a single hero, doing massive damage, felt good to the director. The massive damage made the minions feel dangerous and a serious threat, but it felt really bad for the players. A single squad's attack could almost take out a hero by itself. Spreading the damage out makes it feel better for both director and players. A squad can also have a captain. This is a stronger monster with a more complex stat block. The captain operates independently from their squad, but is tied to their squad in 2 ways. The first is that they take their turn at the same time as their squad. That means with 2 power rolls, the director is able to run a couple of handful of monsters without it being a drag. The second is that the captain grants extra abilities to the minions in their squad. For example, a goblin assassin captain grants their squad the ability to hide at the end of their turn as a free action. This ability is always available to the captain, but the squad lose the ability if their captain is killed. This system of squads and captains is very flexible. There's no restriction to use a goblin captain with a goblin squad. The goblin squad could just as well be led by a demon. with a demon granting their extra ability to the goblins. Or the goblin squad could operate on their own with no captain, or a captain could be in an encounter without a squad. This design makes squads a common feature in combat. While it's easy to think of minions as skeletons or goblins, higher level minions can include orcs or lizard folk or shades. There will be squads that are appropriate for every level of play in the monster book. James mentioned that there might be space for 450 monsters in the monsters book, where about 120 of them are squads. When designing an encounter, it's important to find the right balance of monsters. This has been solved in different ways, and the MCDM RPG's attempt at this is currently encounter values. Each hero is assigned an encounter value of 15. Add up the encounter values of all the heroes, and you've got a budget for an encounter. Each minion and captain is also assigned an encounter value. You add monsters to the encounter to fill up the budget. It looks like the intention is that each monster has an appropriate hero level, which means that two monsters may have the same encounter value, but be of different strength based on which hero level they're appropriate for. A goblin might have an encounter value of 3, meaning that there should be 5 goblins for every hero. Orcs may have the same encounter value of 3, but at a different appropriate level. Goblins may be appropriate for level 1, but orcs at level 2. That means orcs are more powerful than goblins, even though they have the same encounter value. Compared to a hero, though, they are about as powerful as a goblin. At the appropriate level, there should be 5 orcs for every hero. I mention encounter values because monsters aren't the only thing that the encounter value budget can be spent on. While encounter events are out, openers, reversals, and closers, and no longer part of encounter design, it doesn't mean that all the ideas from that design has been thrown out. The design team have been experimenting with something they call dynamic terrain objects. These are parts of the encounter area which are dynamic and can be activated during the encounter. A simple example of something like this could be a hidden spike trap in the middle of the battlefield. A more evocative example could be a boulder that is released and plows its way through the battlefield, squishing everything in its way. Or it could be a statue that emanates an aura in an area around it. Any monsters within that area gets 3 stamina back at the start of their turn. Dynamic terrain objects are there to spice up encounters and make combats about more than just defeating monsters. Now that monsters are more fun to run, the team bumped up against another problem: the monsters being too weak at the tail end of the combat. Over the duration of a combat, the heroes accrue heroic resources and become more powerful. In an adventure, when the heroes also have victory points, granting them even more power, this problem becomes even worse. The hero's power is on a rising curve. The monster's powers should follow that curve closely. They should be almost as powerful as the heroes, but not quite. The heroes are expected to win after all. But the two curves should be really close, such that if the heroes make poor tactical decisions or don't plan well enough, the two curves cross and the monsters get the upper hand. Currently, the monster's curve is a flat line, getting further and further away from the hero's power curve, the further into combat they get. To combat this discrepancy, the team has reintroduced an old concept that was originally tried over a year ago, a heroic resource of sorts for the director. Back then, Matt called it Goblin Points.
Hey, that's the name of the show.
But the current design calls it Villain Power. The director gains villain power at the start of every turn. Currently, this is a set number based on how many heroes there are in combat. In addition, the director also gains villain power through some of the abilities or traits of monsters. When a monster acts in a way that's characteristic of that monster, the director gains villain power. A few examples of when monsters act in character is when goblins flank their enemies, when demons make a hero winded, dying, or dead, or when humans are damaged by magic or psionic attacks. Humans are naturally resistant to supernatural powers in Orden. The director spends villain power to activate monsters' abilities or terrain objects. Spend villain power to use the dragon's breath attack, or spend villain power to make the orc's attack push the enemy 5 squares instead of 3. The shock of ice affects everyone in a 3x3 cube. Spend villain power to make it a 4x4 cube. Or spend villain power to make that boulder plow through the line of heroes. Villain power is most likely the last thing that needs to be finished for the game's rules to be done. Once that's locked in, the work will transition to exclusively creating content for the RPG. Speaking of creating content, that work is already underway, and the focus has been on ancestries lately. The RPG will include both familiar ancestries found in popular fantasy literature, but also a few new ones that are unique to the RPG. The goal is to both give players something familiar, but also spark their interest and imagination with something novel they haven't seen before. James shared which ancestries are expected to be included in the Heroes book: Woad Elf, High Elf, Dwarf, Human, Holder, the MCDM Halfling, Orc, Revenant, an Undead Person, Devils, sophisticated creatures from the 9 cities of Hell, and the MCDM Tiefling, Dragon People, which might be called Wormwights, Memenek, non-organic people from Axiom, Hakan, the Lesser Giants, and Time Raiders, travelers of the timescape, with crystal eyes and 4 arms. Each ancestry gets a short write-up that introduces the ancestry. These introductions aren't some dry documentary-style explanation of the ancestry, as if told from an encyclopedia. The introductions are in-universe stories, where a person of the ancestry is featured. The Devil's ancestry tells the tale of how one devil got stranded in Orden. The Human ancestry is reflected upon by a centuries-old elven professor of humans. Each ancestry will have their own unique introduction. In addition, each ancestry has some mechanical effects. These are not characteristic score increases, but rather other abilities or features that doesn't make the hero stronger, but more versatile. Each ancestry has some feature that makes them stand out from the others. Matt wrote a Patreon post on how work is going with class design. Now that they've spent a lot of time researching how everything should work in terms of mechanics, they can finally get started on making some classes for the game. They've started working on 5 classes so far. Each of the classes have at least 3 subclasses, and the team has designed the first 3 levels for each class. That way, they know that each class has an archetype it can represent through its subclass, and that progression is working. The 5 classes they've worked on so far are Tactician, Conduit, Shadow, Fury, and Elementalist. To make sure every class feels like it has a home, the team made a grid of different specializations or niches each class could fill. The specializations were things like movement, damage, buffing, or control. Then they graded every class at how good they should be at different specializations. This guides design and makes sure that class abilities have the right effect in combat, and they know when a subclass breaks out of the trope of their main class. The Tactician, for example, is good at commanding the battlefield and making sure enemies stay focused on the Tactician. Still, they may have a subclass that specializes in healing, even though that's technically the Conduit's purview. They also mapped out how much a class should progress at every level. How many new abilities become available at each level? When do the numbers of existing abilities increase? Most of this work was already done by James in the fall, but the game has changed a bit since then. So the main job was to figure out the necessary adjustments to fit the changes in the RPG since then. The post also detailed a lot of the work that was done on the Tactician. The post shows off design notes that were made during the design meeting, and a great big list of abilities that could potentially be included in the class. These are brainstorming ideas meant as inspiration for the designer of the class. I won't list the whole list here, but one of my favorites is an ability that could show up at a later level for the Tactician. They first get the ability to never roll a tier 1 result, and then, at a later level, they also can't roll tier 2 results. The Tactician still needs to roll in case of crits, and the still somewhat hypothetical tier 4 result for supernatural weapons. it definitely is going to make the tactician badass. The tactician is also a weapon master and is expected to be brimming with weapons. That means they get to pick 2 kits instead of 1. They get the bonuses from both kits, and if both kits give a bonus to the same stat, the tactician gets the better one. So far, they've outlined 3 subclasses for the tactician. The first is the Vanguard, which leads an army from the front. They're out there, soaking damage and taking charge. The second is the Mastermind, which leads from the back. They read the battlefield and command others for superior tactics. The Mastermind also fills the role as the Archer archetype. And lastly, there's the Insurgent, which utilizes any trick necessary to win. They are sneaky operatives that leads stealth commandos, undermining the enemy. Jeff wrote his first post on Patreon explaining some things regarding the VTT. And the first thing we need to cover is the name. Internally, the VTT is called Codex, which sounds a lot better than MCDM RPG VTT. So I'm going to use Codex instead. The Patreon post details some of the goals for Codex and what customers of MCDM can expect. Customers won't have to pay twice for the same content. If you buy a product from MCDM, it will be available in Codex for no extra charge. And while Codex will not be free to use, MCDM wants to make it possible for directors to invite their players into their game without the players having to pay for access. They also want Codex to make it easy to prepare for sessions, both through built-in creation tools and through something like a marketplace where other directors can share their creations. They also wish the marketplace to support paid creations. To quote Jeff in the post, "We want to make the simple stuff easy and the complex stuff possible." As I mentioned in the previous Roundup episode, calling Codex a VTT is a bit misleading. It's way more than just a digital battle map. Some of the things they want, but are not guaranteed to include, are character management, encounter building, document sharing or handouts, chat system with support for language comprehension, map creation, and modding. When speaking of platform support, they want to support Windows, Mac, and Linux, and distribute Codex through Steam. While it's an extra hurdle to have everyone who's going to play download Steam first, Steam also makes sure to handle a lot of stuff for the developers. Not only downloads, but also friends lists, invites, groups, forums, reviews, and a lot more. We've also had a couple of previews drop this past month. In the Patreon post, there's a video showing someone using Codex to build the Delian 2 map, populating it with walls, doors, secret doors, interiors, and enemies, and then running the tomb, all done within Codex. Separately, the developers of Codex showed off some support for multi-floor maps. All the floors are layered on top of each other, and when panning, the different floors moved independently of each other, creating a very impressive parallax effect. The video also showed support for targeting creatures on different floors, and seamlessly moving between floors. Specifically in the video, they showed a hero falling from one floor to the one below. People are eagerly awaiting the new playtest packets. The Patreon playtest packet for everyone that subscribes to the MCDM Patreon, and the backer playtest packet for everyone that backed the crowdfunder campaign back in December. It looks like the Patreon packet will be the first out of the gate. The packet is a bit delayed because of the work that needs to be finished on the director side, which I've already covered in length. The goal is to have the packet out before the end of summer. That might mean July, and it might not. The packet will include character creation, some ancestries, 3 levels for 5 classes, which are Fury, Conduit, Shadow, Elementalist, and Tactician. There will also be some subclasses included for the classes, but not all of them. There will also be monsters using the new design and villain power. The packet will also include the new action economy, where move has been separated out from maneuvers. That means a creature can move in addition to taking an action and doing a maneuver on their turn. It looks like the adventure included in the packet will be the first part of the Fall of Blackbottom adventure MCDM intends to use for Gen Con. The adventure is set during Ajax's attack on the city of Blackbottom, witnessed during the first episode of The Chain of Acheron. The backer packet will be much like the patron packet, but will most likely release a bit later once the design team has had a bit of feedback from the patron packet. The backer packet will be a bit more polished and probably not include as many rules as the Patreon packet. It also looks like the game could be feature complete by the time the backer packet releases. Matt mentioned that villain power is the last thing that needs to be locked in before all the rules are in place. The license and graphic materials could also be ready in time for the packet release, which means that third-party creators can start creating content for the RPG. Jordy, one of the designers on the team, told an anecdote from one of the internal tests. I thought it highlighted how the MCDM RPG really tries to make combats more fun. A boring combat can't be short enough, and a fun combat can't be long enough. The Tactician uses their ability to let an ally use opportunity attack against an enemy that moves, even if the ally is not standing next to the enemy. The Tactician orders the Elementalist to attack the moving enemy. The Tactician has already marked the enemy, enabling the Elementalist to use a more powerful signature attack instead of the weaker opportunity attack. The Elementalist uses Fire Lance, doing both damage and pushing the enemy. The Conduit notices that the Elementalist almost rolled a tier 3 result and uses their triggered action to boost the Elementalist's power roll from a tier 2 to tier 3. The Fire Lance pushes the enemy even further, and the Elementalist is able to add an extra boost to the push, moving the enemy even further still. And on top of all that, with the power roll result now being a tier 3 result, the Tactician gets an extra focus too. This game sounds like a ton of fun. At the end of the RPG related news, I'm introducing a new section called Mott's Miscellaneous.
Mott.
Thank you, Mott. These are small pieces of info that don't really fit in anywhere else. Here we go. With maneuvers not being used to move anymore, the team has added more maneuvers. In addition, classes now grant a maneuver that's exclusive for that class. Caster kits are getting reworked. While weapon kits were working fine, the caster kits felt a bit weird. Caster kits now get a maneuver, which often comes in the form of a little spell that's in addition to the signature action that all kits grant. The Conduit currently designs their own subclass. There's a few different domains to choose from. The Conduit picks 2 of them and combines them for their own custom subclass. Also, the Conduit has been changed to use only one heroic resource. Wrath and Virtue is out in favor of Piety. While Wrath and Virtue was interesting, it created more bookkeeping at the table and was difficult to balance. Wealth is tied to level. The higher level the hero is, the more they can afford. Wealth can also be increased by titles. James really hopes there will be space in the monsters book to include proper rules for creating your own monsters. He says there's no point in hiding the way MCDM makes monsters. When a side in combat has surprise, they automatically win the initiative, which means they get to decide who goes first. The surprise creatures get the surprise condition, which prohibits them from using triggered actions, and attacks against them have an edge. The surprise condition ends at the end of the first round. The RPG will have its own flavor of undead, creatures that are cobbled together of leftover human parts, the War Dogs, an army of constructed creatures serving Ajax's will. There will likely be War Dogs appropriate for every level. Matt explained that they have produced a lot of stuff for the RPG, which they haven't shown off to the patrons. He expects they will be able to share a lot of more stuff in the times ahead. It might be art or full write-ups of ancestries. They will most likely be near done material. Demons will be a common enemy in the RPG. The monsters book will include demons appropriate for every level of play. Conditions now specify when they end. They either end at end of turn, or by making another resistance roll. Heroes can also deal end of encounter conditions, which lasts until the end of the encounter. Regular monsters can't remove those, but boss monsters can. Kits limit which special weapons a hero can use. If the hero finds a magical longsword, they need to use a kit that can wield a longsword. While dying, taking actions and triggered actions forces the hero to roll 1d6 and lose that much stamina. Heroes get more stamina as they level up, but monsters also do more damage. Heroes do also get more ways to mitigate damage as they level up. Monsters can be vulnerable to certain kinds of damage. When they are, they lose a bit more stamina every time they are hit with that kind of damage. Flea Mortals included rules for reskinning monsters, e.g. making a goblin with human stats, but still retained the feel of a goblin. The team expects it will be easier to reskin monsters in the RPG than in Flea Mortals. And finally, the Discord has been salivating over 20-sided D10s. These are D20s, but they are numbered 1 through 10 twice, and are coveted for being better to roll than D10s. In a response to a community member saying they'd buy 20-sided D10s with MCDM branding, the general manager of MCDM replied, quote, "We are working on something," end quote. And that's it for RPG news. Next, something post-RPG related. Matt talked a bit about what constitutes a success for the RPG. He and the team think success is the RPG finding an audience, a group of players who come back to the game again and again to play more, who buys more content for the game and continues to play it for years and years. MCDM won't be able to continue making things for the RPG if there isn't a solid player base investing in the game. Matt also thinks that MCDM is too big to only work on the RPG post-launch. They have already internal ideas of what the next thing for MCDM might be. While some people in the company is working on the RPG, others will be working on other games and products. And now, it's time to share some of the stuff the fantastic MCDM community has created and shared in the last month. Let's jump in. Nyrift has created a talent minion. The Scion Pawn belongs in a choir that specializes in a certain school of thought and gains access to different bonuses and abilities based on it. Nage Ifar has created the Big Book of Encounters. It's a collection of encounters that can be adapted to almost any campaign. The scenarios include monster positioning guides, tactic tips, and end conditions. Beepcrank has converted the Dragon Shaman from D&D 3.5 edition to a Paladin subclass in D&D 5th edition. The Oath of the Scale Paladin aims to honor and emulate the mighty dragons. Max Falcon has created wealth rules for D&D 5e. Instead of tracking individual gold pieces, the party has a wealth level that indicates how much purchasing power they have. Aramil has created the Oath of Vigilance Paladin subclass for D&D 5th edition. The goal of Oath of Vigilance Paladins is to seek out lies and deception. They seek out thieves and lying politicians to protect the innocent. The Dice Society has released a new episode of their podcast. This episode's main topic is the work done on monster design in the RPG. Give it a listen. Spartier has created the Zenith Phoenix, a CR30 monster. The Zenith Phoenix is a solar celestial that was saved by their Phoenix companion. As usual, there's a separate section in the links section with links to MCDM being mentioned or covered outside of our trusty community. If you know of anything that should be included next time, send me an email on tips@goblinpoints.com. Links to everything, including this script, can be found on goblinpoints.com. Until next time, snackis.